Carol, you all right on your mic? Hopefully nothing gets knocked down. Carol, you're all set. Nick, you're good. Not so good. Might have to go. When we do that, I'm sorry.
Okay.
Listen, I need these people to move over a little bit more. So let me get a little cozy.
There's water underneath you.
A little floppy.
Thank you.
All right. Everybody's face.
Put these papers in.
Everybody's seeing? Anybody's looking at anybody's head?
So you let me know. You're good? Okay. All right, I'm going to step away.
Okay. All set? Good morning, everyone. My name is Peter Baines. I'm the Executive Director of the New York Conference of Mayors. We are gathered here today with our Legislative Committee in Albany to deliberate over the legislative priorities for our statewide association. We represent the cities and villages of the state of New York. So we're spending today looking back on this past legislative session and then forward to the next session to establish our priorities, develop strategies for implementing those priorities. And today we thought we'd share with you the 3 top priorities we've established coming out of this meeting, and we have to do that our 3 officers, our president, our first vice president, and our second vice president. And we'll kick things off with our president, who's the mayor of the village of Freeport, Mayor Robert Kennedy. Mayor? Thank you.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Robert Kennedy. It's R-O-B-E-R-T, K-E-N-N-E-D-Y, Village of Freeport Mayor, and also the president of NYCOM. Today, following our quarterly board meeting and annual legislative priorities meeting in Albany, we underscore 3 significant issues headlining the robust agenda in hopes that we could hone in on several matters that are critical to all of the communities in New York State. NYCOM's membership ranges from villages such as Freeport, which has 45 to 50,000 people in 4 square miles, to very large cities and small villages and cities throughout New York State. I'll be discussing the impacts and concerns that the cities and villages have regarding the state-mandated criminal justice reforms, which will be effective January 1 this year. I will be followed by Mayor Richard David of Binghamton, our first vice president, who will share his thoughts regarding the transportation infrastructure, Consolidated Highway Improvement Program known as CHIPS, and then Mayor Fran Murray of Rockville Center, our second vice president, who will be discussing the aid and incentives to municipalities, which is the AIM program. Each of these matters is closely related to each other in that we are collectively charged with keeping property taxes in check, providing top-flight services to our communities, and looking ahead for opportunities and economic growth and expansion. In speaking with my colleagues, it's become clear that criminal justice reform that will soon be enacted on January 1, while well-intended and important, as structured today, there are flaws in numerous logistical and financial challenges. In my community alone, the village of Freeport, I have a budget deadline of March 1. My final budget has to be in by January 19th. I am being told by our budget director and our police department and our attorneys that I will have a $2.2 million increase this year on our budget, which is about 5.7% property tax increase as a result directly to the mandated services that are going to be required with this law. One of the things that we have to look at is I have roughly 1,100 arrests a year in our police department. Out of those 1,100 arrests, currently we're called for about 50 sets of discoveries. Now we'll have to have discovery on 1,100 cases and in 15 days. Not to mention roughly 5,000 cases of our buildings department, which local code then would require us to follow the same law as far as discovery is concerned. So picture 6,000 cases, discovery submitted within 15 days, the burden it will have on the residents in the village of Freeport. We have a 2% tax increase, a 2% tax cap, but a 5.7% increase this year. Discovery. If you look at some of the issues with discovery, every radio transmission and recording from the officers and transmissions from all 911 calls will be included. All body cameras. Freeport was the first police department to mandate the use of every patrol officer with a body camera. Every body camera from every police officer will then have to be downloaded from the cloud. If you have 12 or 15 officers at the scene, every one of those body cameras are going to have to be downloaded for discovery. All generated paperwork, all photographic evidence, all dash cams for the police cars, all other video recordings, all wireless statements, complaints, and defendant statements, all call logs, police officers' memo book, entries, blotter entries, and other evidence logs, any material determined to be Brady or Rosario material, any and all material which would be considered part of this crime would then have to be submitted within 15 days as part of discovery. This is another unfunded mandate that the villages and the cities now will have to address. We have villages and cities who have opposed this, including the Nassau County District Attorney's Office, Freeport Police Department, numerous prosecutors, Lynbrook, Rockville Center, Long Beach, Hempstead, Port Dickinson, City of Orleans, Dansville, Valley Stream, Middle Neck, Hempstead, Graniteville, Canton, Lawrence, Beacon, Delhi, Quogue, Newark, Brownsville, Menards, Irvington, Port Plain, Minola, Tuckahoe, Greene, Springville, Mineola, Plandome, Upper Brookville, Westbury, the town of Hempstead, Morris, Syracuse, and many, many more villages have signed a petition already opposing this law and asking that it be repealed so we have time to review it and enforce it properly. What effects is it going to have on your villages? Every village is different. You may have more police, you may have more building department codes. But what are the effects, both financial and logistical? That is a question everybody has to look at. Why do we demand 15 days on discovery when if in fact we're giving out desk appearance tickets to not hold the individuals in court, in jail? If somebody, listen, nobody wants to keep somebody in jail for 6 months for stealing something from a store. But if you're letting them out with a desk appearance ticket, then why is the mandate here that we have to have 1,100 or 6,000 cases of discovery provided in 15 days? NYCOM has several recommendations, including making the discovery in felony cases not applicable till after the indictments, a stay from discovery requiring 30 days involving the cases which may be subject to a plea bargain, withhold sensitive information, such as victims' contact information, without having to obtain a court order, request 6 months delay on the implementation of this reform until July, and to ensure that the cities and villages are provided with additional financial support to offset the cost of these mandated measures. These are common sense measures that are critical to bringing more measured transition to these reforms rather than a logistical, financial train wreck to the cities and villages in New York State. I ask that we all look at these, review the facts of it, and then we go back to our legislators. We must try to get this repealed. We must try to get a delay on this, and then let's redesign it properly without rushing it through. With that being said, I'd like to introduce our Mayor of Binghamton, Rich David. The
Good morning, everyone, and thank you. My name is Rich David. I'm the mayor of the city of Binghamton and the first vice president of NYCOM. Very pleased to be joined this morning by so many mayors of cities across the state of New York. One of the reasons that we enjoy highlighting the topic of infrastructure so much is because it is a bipartisan issue. It is an issue that the governor and the legislature, both chambers and both parties, agree that it is an important focus for all of the respective mayors in the villages and the cities. And what we want to do is not only shine a spotlight on the importance of infrastructure. If we truly want to get New Yorkers back to work, it is by focusing on infrastructure across the state of New York, not just downstate, but upstate and all of our cities, towns, and villages. And so one of the things that I think is important when we talk about infrastructure is the anatomy of infrastructure. Most people just focus on neighborhood streets, and they do so because they are of critical importance to our residents. But it's not just streets. It's water facilities, it's wastewater facilities, it's parking ramps, it's bridges, and the list goes on and on. And so one of the primary mechanisms that the legislature and the governor focus on is CHIPS funding. And of course, we would like to see a significant amount of improvement and investment when it comes to CHIPS funding. But when you look at neighborhood streets, you would be, I think, surprised to know that the significant cost is not the pavement and the top coat. It is the water and sewer lines underneath the streets. It is the sidewalks and curbs. It is new compliance with federal ADA regulations that make the costs of making the intersections ADA compliant almost equal to, in some cases, the amount of money that cities and villages get in CHIPS funding. So it's more about looking at all of these different areas and developing a plan or strategy to focus on continued investment. All of us are certainly grateful when we receive increases in CHIPS money. Could be $100,000, a couple $100,000. But when you look at some of the items that I've outlined, that really doesn't go very far. And historically, we have seen some progress with regards to water and sewer, and we'd really just like to build on that because it is such a bipartisan issue. It is an area where there is already an interest and focus, but it's more about getting funding for all of the other aspects of infrastructure that we just outlined. As many of you know, last year the MTA 5-year plan was funded. Historically or typically, the DOT 5-year plan is funded around the same time. That wasn't the case last year. It's very important to the cities that the DOT plan, much of that money which goes into upstate communities, is funded with as much enthusiasm and passion and support as the MTA plan. And Pave New York and Bridge New York, again, to allocate additional funding to neighborhood streets, to our bridges, so that we can have a comprehensive package and focus with regards to the money that is coming into our respective communities. In the city of Binghamton, for example, I have a wastewater facility, I have a water filtration plant, and I have all of these sorts of examples that we're highlighting. And when the legislature and governor do have an increase with regards to CHIPS funding, and when you add tens of millions of dollars, it sounds good as a package, but when it trickles down to the municipalities, it really is just doesn't really make a dent when you look at the overall infrastructure needs in our respective communities. Binghamton, like many villages and cities across the state of New York, has they're aging communities with aging infrastructure that has been neglected for decades. Right? So this is not going to change overnight, but what we want to have is a multi-year, long-term focus on the infrastructure, because the alternative is that we just have to borrow the money. Right? And so many of my colleagues who are standing behind me, they're either limited to solely utilizing CHIPS money or having to make the tough decision of making cuts in other areas or borrowing money. And not everyone can afford to borrow money in this particular environment, specifically with a tax cap. So it really creates a bottleneck for mayors when making those critical investments. And the cost, as we all know, you're talking not about tens of thousands, you're talking about millions or tens of millions of dollars worth of investment needed in infrastructure. And for small cities and small villages, that's unrealistic to be able to handle or tackle on your own. So as a group, as a coalition of mayors, we agree that this is an issue of critical importance. It's an issue where the state has expressed an interest in focusing on more. We have seen progress, and so we also want to acknowledge that from the governor and from state legislators, but we just want to make sure that this is an issue that will constantly be evolving. There is no end or destination. This is something that's constantly evolving, and each year we need to make sure that the focus is put on, because when you look at cities in other states that are growing and thriving, part of that plan is major investments in infrastructure. And when we forego those investments in New York State, we continue to lose a competitive advantage, and it just makes those costly upgrades so much more expensive in the future. So we can't forego these for so long where we have no choice but to make an investment. We have to go from being reactive to proactive. The foundation is set. You have a group of partners willing to work with you the best we can to make these critical changes. And I believe if we continue to put a full court press on this, all of the mayors behind me, this is a critical focus where we can make progress and significant growth. So with that, I would turn it over to the Mayor of Rockville, Senator Fran Murray, to talk about aid and incentives to municipalities.
Good morning, and thank you, Mayor David and Mayor Kennedy. And I want to start off by thanking the dedicated and passionate people standing around us here this morning. These are elected officials from all over the state of New York who take time out of their day, out of their week, to care so much about their constituents, their residents. They come to Albany every November and fight for what we think is right. And Ames funding is something that we've had, and it was taken away from us. So what do we do about it? We got together under the leadership of our current president, Robert Kennedy, along with our executive director, Peter Baines, and his entire staff. And we fought. We lobbied our legislators from this land, New York State, and they heard us loud and clear. And the governor admitted that he might have made a mistake. But I stand here today thanking him because he put that money back. And that was for the 2019-2020 budget. It's a lifeline to us, Ames money. My municipality is worth $400,000 in Ames money. Without that, in the tax cap era, we would have had to go over the tax cap. We're trying to comply with the governor and what he wants to do. But without that Ames money, we could not have done it. So, going forward, we haven't had an increase in Ames money in over 10 years. So we're going to do the same thing, just like we're here today. We're going to lobby, we're going to fight what we believe in, and we're going to go forward, and hopefully we can get more money to help, like you heard from Mayor David, to help our infrastructure and keep our taxes down in the future. Thank you.
So those are the three statements we wanted to make. We're certainly, any of the mayors who spoke or anyone else up here is willing to take questions from any of the press.
I have a question about the discovery law changes. Obviously, I was some of the mayors would want defendants to eventually get this information. Is there a reasonable amount of time that's longer than the 15 days that you all think would make more sense to process all the things that you went through, the police body cams, all the information? What would be a reasonable amount of time?
Well, in terms of the proposals we're offering, the 6 proposals that Mayor Kennedy discussed, rather than an absolute change from 15 days to some other amount of days, we've tried to take a more granular look at if it's a felony, You don't need to do the discovery until the indictment. If it's the kinds of violations that are subject to plea bargaining, that you have we said 30 days, but it could be a different period, a longer period, where plea bargaining is being negotiated, that you wouldn't have to come up with the discovery during that period. I don't know if there's anything you want to add, Bob, to that?
No, I think basically the short delay that's required in order to provide as many discoveries as called for now may change. I think we have to really sit down and study it and see actually how many cases. If I'm doing 6,000 cases, what is the amount of time that's required to do it? And number two, more importantly, is the financial burden. I mean, there's another major unfunded burden that we have to take onto our residents in property taxes. So, I think if we sat down for a couple of months and reviewed it and came up with a policy that worked for all the different municipalities. There's different municipalities, local laws have an effect on this that I don't think was taken into consideration when this legislation was passed. So if you sat down with these different local municipalities, figured out what laws they have, maybe we could extend it 45 days. Maybe we'd be able to give the opportunity of plea bargaining first. And thirdly, major factor is the financial burdens that we have to endure as a result of this legislation.
What is the cost for municipalities? Where does that money go? What would you use it for?
Well, I would need, for an example, I have 1,100 cases, I said, of police arrests. Normally I do 50 of them as the DA calls. Well, if I'm doing 1,100 cases, every week, every day, I'm going to have to keep, and I can't hire a civilian to do this discovery. I have to hire police officers. So a police officer is going to have to do that. They're going to spend hours, 5, 6, for example, a stabbing. You might have 6 or 7 officers doing an entire day at discovery. Bring these officers in now for overtime, it's going to cost a lot. And if I don't bring them in overtime, I have to hire additional police officers. So there is a big burden. It's been suggested to me. For the village alone, it's roughly $2.2 million a year between the police department man hours, the buildings department man hours, the local courts and per people hours. So they're the estimated numbers at this point to be safe, to be able to submit a budget that we're not going to have a hole in next year.
So you think that cost is hiring more people versus technology?
Well, some villages and some cities may have the technology already. We don't have it. Maybe Nassau County and some other cities like Albany might be able to extract all of this out of their software. We don't have that right now. So in the interim, I have to look at least meeting the requirements of this law and then investing maybe into this discovery equipment that we could be able to reduce it sometime in the future.
What do you say to the governor's excuse that he's been giving over the past few months that they included some revenue raisers in the past budget, like an internet sales tax, to boost funds for municipalities?
Well, let's look at internet sales tax. First of all, the villages lost AIM funding. Now, the AIM funding is coming from the counties. The counties are taking it out of internet sales tax. Well, the village of Freeport falls in Nassau County, and Nassau County has a commission that controls the spending, and that commission can override what the county is doing. So it doesn't guarantee me any AIM funding in the future. We don't know what the AIM funding is going to be. We don't know what the income is going to be from internet sales tax. I hope it's going to be good. But, we deferred that cost to the state, put it on the burden of the counties. The county owes $300 million in Nassau County. I hope we get the money from them.
Is there a statewide number that municipalities would need for the criminal justice reforms, or is it more
I think it would be done individually. And I think that many local municipalities didn't realize, depending upon their laws, that they would have to now be burdened with additional costs because their local laws will trigger this discovery requirement.
What kind of local laws are you talking about?
Well, let's say buildings department, electric violations, boiler violations. If in fact that these laws will require a jail term for failure to show or compliance, that would trigger you to go into this discovery package.
Mayor David, if I could just ask you about the support of the ending of the cash bail. Supporters will say this is important because many people are being held on cash bail simply because they don't have the money to pay for it. But obviously the concern here is what this is going to mean for those local communities. What do you say to supporters who say people should not be in jail on bail before their case is adjudicated.
Yeah, I think as President Kennedy said, the issue is more about the financial impact for municipalities in dealing with the changes, not necessarily the bail reform, because no one should be held for a lengthy period of time for, I forget the example that you used, but it was a very minor, for stealing something from a store, I think was the example that you used. I think what we're basically saying is there was a disconnect or a lack of a conversation in general with regards to district attorney's office, municipal police departments, with regards to how this was going to impact a police department's ability to comply with these dates and with these deadlines. And so one of the things that hasn't come up yet from this group is we keep talking about 15 days, but many district attorney's offices are saying, well, they're going to need the evidence prior to 15 days so they can do their due diligence or redactions or et cetera. So in many cases, that period of time might be significantly less. So it's not necessarily the bail reform, but the discovery process that I think that a lot of us are concerned about, and now crunching numbers with regards to, as President Kennedy said, how much is this going to cost my respective municipality? Do I need to hire more people? I can tell you in the case of the city of Binghamton, we do not currently have the staffing to meet the timeline that's in place right now. So that's a conversation I'm having right now with my chief of police and my law enforcement team with regards to what do we need to do? Do we need to restructure? Do we need to hire more people? My budget for 2020 has just recently been adopted by City Council. So there's a lot more that would go into it, and I suspect that many of my colleagues here are in a similar situation. Not all of us are on the calendar year. Some have their budgets in March or April, so there's a lot of different number crunching, I think, that's going on. So as Peter said, part of it, there was a very granular approach with regards to what the concerns are. I don't think anybody's saying we need to just eliminate everything. It's about taking a step back and having enough time, maybe delaying the implementation, so that these important conversations and the folks that are responsible for implementing this have the tools and resources they need to do in a financially responsible fashion.
While you're standing there, I got to ask, and I don't know if the mayors of Auburn and Binghamton and Batavia are here, but there was a report over the weekend about baseball.
Sure.
About that those three cities might lose their local baseball teams. As the mayor of Binghamton, what are you going to try to do to ensure that the local ponies stay, and how concerned are you about this report?
Sure, well, that's a great question. I think first I would say that I would just reiterate this is a proposal by Major League Baseball. And historically, I think we've seen this every decade or so when contract negotiations come up between the minor league baseball and Major League Baseball. So obviously, this is just the first proposal. I don't think that proposal will be adopted in its form, but I can certainly tell you in the last 48 hours, I've had multiple conversations with the owner of the team, John Hughes, with our Senator Fred Akshar, representatives from Congressman Brindisi's office, Senator Schumer's office. So generally speaking, it's something that we will fight tooth and nail to prevent from happening. The state of New York and the city and the owner recently partnered to invest about $8 million, I think, in that stadium to address a series of deficiencies and to make it compliant with the standards of minor league baseball. And one of the points in the article that was referencing the concern of Major League Baseball was that several of these minor league facilities are out of compliance. That is not the case in the city of Binghamton. The city, as you know, owns the stadium. And we were very proactive several years ago where there were deficiencies to put us in a strong position. And I think our proactive approach several years ago, working with the state of New York, Leader Flanagan, Governor Cuomo, Senator Fred Akshar, put us in a strong position that our facilities are in compliance. And this is something that we will absolutely fight. We have a lease with the team. The team has a player management development agreement with the New York Mets team. So it's certainly something that we're concerned about. I mean, no one wants to wake up and read that sort of story in the newspaper that there's a plan by Major League Baseball to, in essence, destroy a major portion of the minor league teams. They're focusing on teams with a shorter season, typically the single A, with the potential to impact double A, and the precedent that could be set for triple A teams in the future. So it's something we're concerned about, but we are organized and mobilized very quickly. There's supposed to be another meeting at the end of November with Major League and Minor League Baseball, and then another meeting early December. We should have more information at that point in time, but we're well positioned, and we're going to fight for our team.
Mayor, I'll just follow up on Joe's question because you mentioned Akshar and Flanagan. This year, we saw a dramatic change in the focus of the legislature. So we're now here at the end of 2019. We're seeing a Democratic progressive agenda downstate, New York City mainly, controlling that focus. So I'm just wondering if any of you will say that you're concerned about this New York City focus, which is pretty clear because a lot of the stuff was pent up until the Democrats took over both houses. But now it's getting out, and that's what they want to work on. So are you concerned, or if anyone else here is concerned about the focus now, and how do you go about dealing with that? And meanwhile, what happened with these bills on criminal justice getting out? Where were you several months ago when this was getting voted on? But if you could start with the first part of that.
Okay, the first part of your question, is that pertaining to what's going on with Major League Baseball, or is that just a general statement?
Not a baseball,
Okay.
but the focus of the legislature now, focusing on these New York City issues as opposed to upstate and the suburbs. Because your voice is changed.
My voice?
No, I mean, not your voice.
Okay.
The voice of the meeting now.
It's going to change.
Okay. All right. I was just checking. So I guess I should preface this by saying I can only speak for myself on this. But I focus on as many non-political issues as I can, such as the infrastructure issue that I've been talking about right now. Your specific question about where were we when the discussion of bail reform was being talked about, where I was talking with our state representatives about the impact that this would have on our respective municipality, and I suspect that many of my colleagues were doing the same thing. I know that through NYCOM, this was an issue that Peter and the NYCOM staff were involved in advocating on a statewide behalf, but as an individual mayor, that's how the process works. I've got 2 assembly members in my area, 1 state senator, and so I make sure to make my voice known with them about what my concerns are and what the impact on my respective municipality would be. But with regards to the future, as mayors, our job is to focus on our respective municipalities. There is a collection of Democrats, Republicans, and probably other registrations who are here. I couldn't tell you who they are because we don't focus on partisan issues. There's no political way to plow snow or to pick up garbage or recycling or fix the streets. These are the issues that we collectively focus on together, and our voice, our collective voice, if Peter doesn't mind me saying, will continue to be focusing on the needs of villages and cities.
Can I just ask both Robert and Richard, we're 2 months out from criminal justice reforms taking effect. Knowing that you don't have the money to do it right now, what's going through your head? What's your planning process like?
Well, obviously, I have myself a budget coming up, which my tentative budget has to be in December, and my final budget in January, and I'm going to have to include this anticipated additional expense in my budget. So I would just like to say, whether they're Democratic or Republican elected officials in our Senate or our Assembly, I want them to know that this increase will be blamed, guaranteed, on this mandated increase that wasn't considered when this bill was signed. The residents are going to know it. This is not a failure on the mayor's behalf or NYCOM. This was done. It was done, in fact, on a partisan line. It was included in the budget for the year, and it's something that we have to deal with now. And there's a $2.3 million increase that's going to go on. I'm going to explain why it's going on to my residents.
And What I'm going to do is I'm going to do what I need to do to make sure that my city is in compliance with the law. If it is enacted on January 1st, what will likely happen is I'm going to have to reopen my budget. I'm going to have to work with City Council. There are no new revenues coming in, so I'm going to have to change the budget. It means I'm going to have to make some cuts in some other areas. If I need to hire more personnel, which I believe is what I'm going to need to do, then that's what I'm going to do, because we are going to be in compliance. But again, it's just an example of if there was more time put into this process, if the right conversations were had with those who are responsible for implementing this, I think much of this could have been avoided. And I think that's one of the thoughts or concerns that we're expressing.
Mayor McCarthy? Hey Gary, how's it going?
Hello.
I wanted to ask you specifically, how will the criminal justice reforms affect the city of Schenectady, if at all?
Again, we anticipate a need for increased staffing, and there's going to be related costs to that. We have not done a full analysis based on the caseload of what that would be. We're still hopeful that what I will call rational minds will prevail, and there's going to be a little bit more flexibility in terms of the implementation of these changes.
But will it affect the police department, for example? And I know obviously Bob Carney is on the county level, but have you been speaking to him directly about how this will turn out come January?
Well, again, as Mayor David has pointed out, we're going to comply with the law. And the process is the municipality or the police department, whether it's sheriff, village, city, has to take the appropriate items that have been deemed for discovery, turned over to the district attorney's office, and the district attorney's office today, in the 15-day point, has to then turn it over to the defense. So for us, some people have talked about the municipalities having to provide that to the DA's office in 5 days, which does put a significant burden in just terms of the caseload with the volume of information that is potentially available and would fall under the criteria that's been put in place.
When the governor was over just a couple of weeks ago for the $10 million, did he mention any concerns that you had with what's playing out here?
I did not.
Well, to follow up on that, a few years ago, Stephanie Miner, one of your members, when she was mayor of Syracuse, was put in the Cuomo doghouse after she made noise about the impacts of the state budget. Shortly after the governor announced his proposed budget, she complained about it. I think she wrote something in the New York Times, and she was disciplined through the Democratic Party. I think she was pushed out of her leadership role in the state committee. So is there fear among you who are Democrats of this governor because he may be retaliatory?
I think we're here today to work not only with the governor's office, but with the leadership in the legislature to see if we can't come to a consensus that serves everyone's needs.
No, you're not afraid of that.
I look forward to working with the governor, his staff. We've had a great relationship with it in Schenectady. It's been an impressive transformation that has happened within our community. You've seen $1.5 billion in investment over the last decade. The governor has played a key role in that. Does the governor maybe disagree on some of the positions I may take on a given day? Yes. Are there days that I could debate him on some things? But the overall record of Governor Cuomo in the state is actually fairly impressive.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right.